everyone. As it's boiling today in Ireland, which is rare, I thought a perfect time then to discuss dysautonomia. As for me personally, and maybe you if you have the condition, heat is a massive trigger and I'm not a fan of summer unfortunately at all. So what is dysautonomia and how does it relate to Ehlers-Danlos syndrome? Dysautonomia is basically an umbrella term and it means that there's a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. This type of nervous system really controls everything in your body that you do automatically and subconsciously without thinking about it. So, say for instance, breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, a lot of things. And because of that, there's a lot of symptoms that someone could have then if they have dysautonomia. So it's nearly as hard to diagnose as EDS because it can seem so vague, and it's like, how do all these minor symptoms and big symptoms fit together in one? So dysautonomia then is an umbrella term, and you might have also heard of POTS. POTS is a type of dysautonomia. It's POTS, and that's postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. They're all big long words, and hopefully I said them all correctly. But basically, that is the most common form of dysautonomia. So if you have dysautonomia, you might have POTS. If you're like me, you have a POTS crossover because apparently I just can't do anything simple. So if you have this condition, you may have noticed that the onset would generally be in teenage years, sometimes early teenage years, but sometimes childhood as well. You might have known issues. You might have had issues from very young. Everyone's different, but there's definitely a peak in the teenage years just due to hormones and everything else going on in the body. The onset can be quite sudden, so it can be quite frightening. I do recall, obviously, myself, and with a lot of people, if you have this condition, you probably have a very similar story. I used to get very dizzy and faint in school, and I fainted a couple of times, but I never really thought it was a problem. I think some of my teachers thought as well that it was low blood sugar. Like many teenage kids, many teenage girls, you forget to eat something at break, so I think things were just put down to probably low blood sugar, normal teenage stuff. But I really did suffer, and I suppose I kept that quiet to myself in a lot of ways because I already knew that I had pain since I was younger. So there wasn't really, to me, this was just another element to that. And there was, I suppose, the usual thing of, well, maybe everyone feels this bad. And so it was only really as I got into my 20s and started to get my diagnosis. Now, it's very common for someone with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome to be diagnosed with POTS also. That usually comes about by, the patient with EDS will start to say, I've always felt very dizzy. And the dizziness aspect is kind of the main thing of POTS. So basically, if you have POTS, you will have orthostatic intolerance. And that basically means that you are allergic to standing up or allergic to gravity, as I sometimes call it. But most people with this condition will find that when they sit down or when they're lying down, everything is absolutely fine. Their blood pressure is normal, their heart rate is normal. It is only when we go to stand up that things get a little skewy. Now, depending on what type of dysautonomia you have, your blood pressure might go low, which is the norm kind of, I think, but it also might go high. You can have a mix of both. You will find that your heart rate escalates, so you could feel palpitations. I know sometimes when my heart rate's very high, I don't actually feel it. I could be in hospital being monitored and they say your heart rate's very high, and I look at the monitor and I'm like, God, it is. I don't always feel that. My normal heart rate is just high, so then it will tend to go even higher if I'm having a bad day with my dysautonomia symptoms. So I suppose for anyone out there that has never heard of POTS or dysautonomia, it's easiest if you think of orthostatic intolerance in this way. You might, like an average person, you might stand up sometimes and get a bit of a head rush because you stood up too quickly. You might see little specks in front of your eyes. Now your body quickly switches to go, okay, there's been a change here in motion, and then it quickly levels itself off. So you might get a little bit dizzy for a second and then catch yourself. With people though, unfortunately with POTS, we stand up and that our bodies aren't quick enough to catch on. That's what's going on. Our bodies get really confused. So they start, our heart starts to pump faster and things start going on in our bodies that aren't meant to happen because our brains are trying to overcompensate for, well, I don't know what's going on with this person. And they're trying to equal things off, but it's making us worse, if that makes any sense whatsoever. I think that's kind of the easiest way to explain it to someone who doesn't have the condition. So that quick, head rush that you might have when you stand up, that can be our constant sometimes walking around. And if you aren't diagnosed and this all sounds very familiar to you, then click subscribe and keep watching our videos. And if you have EDS, then you very possibly also have POTS or another form of dysautonomia. Now, I should mention, obviously, as I said, POTS is the most common type, but there's several other types, and I won't go into them because, well, quite frankly, it's such a vast area that obviously I don't know everything, and I wouldn't want to give the wrong advice out. Secondly, you need a medical professional to tell you what type that you have. So usually the diagnosis is done through a cardiologist and sometimes a neurologist because of all the issues going on. It kind of is a hard issue because the heart is involved, but it's actually more of how the heart interacts with the brain. So unfortunately, that's why diagnosis can be hard. It's not as straightforward as, you might have loads of tests for your heart and you'll be absolutely fine, but what they really need to test is the changes that your body goes through as you stand up and as you do activities during the day. I find a lot of the time that when I'm walking during the day, if I can walk and I'm using my aids, I will feel okay. It's when I have to stand still a lot of the time. So people like us, we don't like standing in queues. We don't like having to stand and chat to you in the street. And my friends are probably watching this now going, oh my God, I'm such an asshole. It's usually fine. And to be honest, because I have the aids with me, there's that extra bit of security. If I'm using my rollator, for instance, I can sit down. And obviously then there's some days that I need the wheelchair, not because of my EDS, but because of my dysautonomia condition. So if you go to a neurologist or cardiologist, that's where you're going to get your diagnosis. Unfortunately, it's easier, said than done here in Ireland. I managed to find a cardiologist. I asked in groups online. I managed to find a cardiologist. Now, he didn't really know a whole lot about POTS, but he'd heard of the condition, and that was really kind of enough for me, privately, unfortunately. So I had all the usual heart tests, and then I suggested to him that I would need a tilt table test. Now, not everyone who's diagnosed with POTS or dysautonomia will go for the tilt table test. If you have these, these kind of feelings and these symptoms, you're put onto a table basically, and you're strapped down and then eventually tilted up to see, and while you're being monitored, to see how your body reacts to basically to being put upright. Now, you're strapped to the table for your safety. A lot of doctors might do a per man tilt table test, which is basically they monitor you, you stand up, and then they'll monitor you again. I will say that if you do decide to go for a tilt table test and you have already these symptoms, it's pretty horrible. It's not good at all. And I would suggest that if you think you have POTS or dysautonomia and you live in Ireland, there is a good Facebook group run by a fantastic woman. If you go to Irish Dysautonomia Awareness on Facebook, and I'll probably link that actually in the video. There's the Facebook page there as well, but if you want to go into the group and ask for more advice in there on who to see in Ireland to get your diagnosis. Treatment then will really depend on your symptoms and severity. My tilt table came back saying that I have a POTS crossover, so I have tachycardia symptoms, which I knew, but when I got very sick on the test, my heart rate actually dropped suddenly. So that's how I got the POTS crossover with another type of dysautonomia, and it's very confusing, not something I totally understand myself, but I'm not on medication because of the crossover element. It was, suggested that I do all the other things instead. So what I do and what I've always done is you want to keep hydrated. You want plenty of salt in your diet, which I know doesn't sound healthy, but if you've got low blood pressure, you need that. And if you have gastro issues, talk to your doctor, because as I said, it affects digestion. So you might have some issues there. So the medications, maybe your GP can even help you with. Some people benefit from stockings. So if you might get blood pooling in your legs, as you stand and walk around, the blood will tend to, navigate downwards into your legs, and that's what makes your head quite lightheaded then as well. So you might benefit from stockings, from tight stockings on your legs to compress that and to prevent blood pooling. So I think that's really everything. If you have a question, please put it in the comments. And as I said, please join support groups on Facebook. If you have any questions about diagnosis, though, you can also put them in the comments. Feel free to ask me.